So good morning friends. In the present video we are going to learn the differences between competitive inhibition and allosteric inhibition. Okay, so the binding site for the competitive inhibition is active site. Okay, so the inhibitor, it will bind the active site. Okay, it will bind active site in case of competitive inhibition. So once the active site is blocked, the reaction, it will not take place. Okay, and in the allosteric inhibition, the inhibitor, it will bind, however the binding site is other than the active site. Okay, other than active site. So inhibitor, what they usually do, they will inhibit the reaction. Okay, active site. So the first difference among the two is that the inhibitor, in case of their competitive inhibition, they will bind the active site, whereas in case of allosteric inhibition, the binding site is not the active site, it will bind somewhere else. Okay, so there is a competition between the inhibitor and the enzyme. Why? Because the inhibitor resembles the substrate. Okay, so in case of competitive inhibition, the inhibitor, it will resemble the substrate. That's why it can actively bind to the active site. However, in case of allosteric inhibition, there is no resemblance. Okay, the third difference between the two processes is that inhibitor is not a part of metabolic pathway. Okay, inhibitor, it is not part of metabolic pathway. Okay, however, the in case of allosteric inhibition, the inhibitor in general, it is part of metabolic pathway. Okay, the fourth and the last difference between the competitive inhibition and the allosteric inhibition is that in case of competitive inhibition, no product formation due to failure of substrate to bind with the active site. So no product and product will be formed. Okay, so no product formation. And why the product is not formed? Okay, this process is inhibited. I will put a cross for the inhibition. But why the process is inhibited? Because the substrate, the original substrate, it will fail to bind the active site. Okay, bind to active site. Okay, it will fail, so it cannot perform its function. However, in case of allosteric inhibition also, there is no product formation. Okay, and the reason we are going to study now, I will put across that there is no product formation. However, the reason for the failure of product formation is that the substrate is not able to bind the active site. Why? Because the inhibitor has already binded to the site other than active site, but that binding leads to conformational change, okay, in active site. And due to the conformational change of the active sites, the substrate is fail to bind to the active site. Okay, so I will explain you once again the difference, that in the case of competitive inhibition, no product is formed. Why? Because when substrate wants to uh, bind to the active site, it failed to do so because already an inhibitor has occupied the active site. However, in case of allosteric inhibition, the inhibitor has bind to the site other than the active site, but then also the substrate fails to bind the active site because the conformational change happens in the active site due to binding of inhibitor to other site. Okay, so in both the cases the substrate fails to bind to the active site, and this will lead to no product formation. So in both the cases the inhibition will be there. Okay, thank you for watching the video.